evening, everyone. Thank you for the final lecture series installment tonight. We have Vince Graham. Vince is a nationally recognized developer and urbanist known for his leadership in creating walkable mixed-use communities rooted in the principles of traditional urban design. As the founder of Loci Design and the former developer of the celebrated Charleston neighborhood, Ion, Graham has spent decades demonstrating how compact human-scale neighborhoods with connected streets, diverse housing types, and vibrant public spaces can foster strong communities. His work has helped shape the national conversation around the new urbanism and place-based development. Graham's participation in the Project 3500 Charrette is especially significant given his deep familiarity with the Charleston region and his experience with delivering real, built examples of walkable urban neighborhoods. His perspectives bridges design and development, offering practical insight into how Charleston can add much-needed housing while maintaining the walkability, beauty, and sense of place that defines this city. So with that, please welcome Vince Graham.
Thank you, Josh. Thank everybody for coming out tonight. It's my pleasure and honor to be here. I would like to thank Mayor Cogswell and City Council and the great staff at the City of Charleston. This is a bold endeavor, and really appreciate what you're doing. Also, we thank Bloomberg and Associates for their patronage of this effort. So, I'm mostly going to talk about the public realm. And if I can get this to forward. There we go. And I thought I'd start with this quote from Martin Luther King Jr., who said, if you want to move people, it has to be toward a vision that's positive for them, that taps important values, that gets them something they desire, and it has to be presented in a compelling way that people feel inspired to follow. And so let's break this down. If you want to move people, is the will there? And it has to be toward a positive vision that taps important values. What are some important values in Charleston? Beauty, hospitality, inclusivity, and then it has to be presented in a compelling way that people really feel inspired to follow. And that's what we're working on this week and in the weeks to come with this plan. Now, beauty, Christian Sotil showed this slide the other night. This was from Christian from a newscast about 3 years ago. Reflecting back on King Charles, then Prince of Wales' visit to Charleston in 1990. And a great quote here from Mayor Riley, and that is, he always led with that. You know, Mayor Cogswell says, lean in. That's what we've been doing, leaning in. Riley was always leaning into beauty. I don't know if I ever heard him give a talk without saying beauty at least 3 times. Another important thing I think is opportunity. This is a quote from a Greek poet, poet of ancient Greece, Alcaeus of Mytilene. Not houses finely roofed, not the stones of walls well built, nor canals, nor dockyards make the city, but men able to use their opportunity. So I think that's what we do sometimes as creatives, as developers, as architects. We need to be thinking about how do we create opportunity, not just for ourselves, but for others, so that they can create beauty. I like this too. Some people collect stamps or cars. I collect quotes. So I'm going to lead with a few just to start. But this is from Hannah Arendt, who was a political theorist, and from her book, Human Action. And she talks about the public realm as the common world gathers us together and prevents us from falling over each other. And what she said, she observed that what makes mass society so difficult to bear is not the number of people involved, but the fact that the world between them has lost its power to gather them together, to relate, and to separate them. So, it's been said that politics follows culture. And I think it's also the case that culture follows environment. And I wonder if our politics, not speaking locally so much, but even state and the national level, have our politics become so toxic because the culture has become so toxic? And has our culture become so toxic because the public realm as the common world, the built environment, has that become so toxic? What if public investment aimed at making the world between people more beautiful? So I'm going to dig down into the public realm a little more just to drive this point home. But in nature, the public realm is our rivers and forests, our beaches, our marshes, the atmosphere, the air we breathe. This is what we all own together. We own this in common. It's the commons. It belongs to us all. And in the built environment, you have squares, small and big. There's a small square in Savannah, Central Park from New York. But primarily, the public realm is composed of the street. That makes up roughly the street rights of way make up about 25% of the public realm, say in downtown Charleston. Now you'll have seen this slide that was this great and powerful image that was prepared by Christopher Liberatos and Jenny Bevan, now Jenny Liberatos. And its focus is on these buildings in the middle. My focus will be on the public realm, the area on the outside, those places that we own in common. And that's mostly what I've been doing in my career, is building public realm. Since 1991, I've participating in building, financing, designing over 20 miles of streets, over 40 miles of sidewalks and paths, and even a short amount of canals. And so, yeah, also been involved in planting over 2,000 trees along those streets and connecting the streets into parks. But yeah, that's what we've been talking about. Architecture a lot. You go out and see on the boards all the beautiful buildings and pictures of buildings. I'll talk about the public realm because that's mostly what I've done. I was fortunate when I moved to South Carolina. I moved to Beaufort in 1989, a few months before Hugo. I moved from Georgia, and I was very fortunate to have as a mentor. I met him soon after I moved here, Charles Frazier, who was the first developer on Hilton Head. And I know some people don't like Hilton Head very much, but there's a lot to admire in it, and the sense of stewardship that Mr. Frazier had. And if you go to Sea Pines, I think that was a kind of a proto-new urbanist, or not Sea Pines, but Harbor Town at Sea Pines, somewhat of a proto-new urbanist development. Frazier was he expected a lot. And so he was always feeding me books and saying, read this and go study Charleston and go study the squares in Savannah. So he was a great inspiration to me in the early days of my career. And another mentor was really the city of Beaufort. I bought my first house there in 1989. This house is about at 1401 North Street. It's about 3,400 square feet, but it didn't have air conditioning. The heat didn't work. It was falling apart. I was able, my first adventure in affordable housing was renting an apartment upstairs, which is what I needed to do to pay the mortgage. So Beaufort became a great mentor to me, the city itself. And one of the things that I learned there, I went to school at the University of Virginia, is because I could walk to meet friends, I could walk to church, I could walk downtown, it reminded me, the light bulb went off, that it was kind of like the University of Virginia. We're walking around Thomas Jefferson's grounds. And it really appealed to me. And I was working at the time for Spring Island, which is a really well done. It's like I call it kind of a golf course community and a nature preserve that was being developed by Jim Chafin and Jim Light. But there was, and this is not Spring Island. It's much more beautiful than this. But it occurred to me because what they were selling is privacy and exclusivity. And the problem with that is that I saw early on is every time a house gets built in that situation, it takes away from what you're trying to sell. It gets progressively less private and exclusive. And sometimes people, after a period of time like this, people come to resent their neighbors. That's what people would say on Hilton Head. Oh, it used to be a nice place till all these people moved here. And that's a common refrain with a lot of places. But living in Beaufort, what occurred to me that if instead what you could offer is a sense of community and belonging and neighborhood, then every time a house was built, it would add to what's being offered and get better over time. That's the theory anyway. And this is Craven Street, a beautiful street in Beaufort, and I think this is a wonderful example of what landscape architects and urbanists call an outdoor room, where you have so as that analogy goes, the grass, the sidewalks, the street itself is the floor of the room. Houses are built, the facades of houses, the fronts of houses are the walls of this room, and then trees are planted and grow up and form a canopy, and that's the ceiling. And all of this, the sidewalks, the lampposts, the trees, that can be considered furniture in the outdoor room. And the houses, if the houses are built up close, so the sidewalks are within conversational distance of the porches, and vice versa. And so it's if they're too far apart, you lose that sense of enclosure. So they're pretty tight, and it's a beautiful situation. And it occurred to me when I had bought my house that these new houses, or that not new houses, these old houses that have been renovated, were selling for a lot of money. And so even though they had windows stick and the plumbing didn't work and all these problems with old houses, but still you had this beautiful public realm that seemed to be in demand based on the price. And so that led to so I just thought, well, if you could offer the same kind of circumstance in a new development with housing where the plumbing worked and you had closet space, then someone might want it. So after I had this big backyard in my house at 1401 North Street, and I built a little house behind it. I subdivided the lot. The bank let me release the back of the lot as collateral, so I used that to get another construction loan. And I ended up putting both on the market before the new one was complete. I sold the old one in 3 days. And then I moved into the new one, and that sold. Someone came up and knocked on my door and offered to buy it. So I think, looking back on it on a percentage return basis, this was probably the best real estate development I've ever done. But again, it kind of reinforced this thought I had. Now Beaufort is, as I mentioned, it was a great mentor for me. Learned a lot of lessons there. It's compact, it's bounded, at least by the Beaufort River. It used to have a boundary street, but that's kind of ignored. But it's a mixed use, easy to walk, beautiful place to walk. And this network that it has, it's a loose grid of streets in Beaufort. It's very important, and I used to run back then, and I was looking at architecture, and I'd always take a different route, running around looking at architecture from different angles. And it occurred to me that there's seemed like an infinite number of possible routes you could take through the grid. So I discussed this with a friend one day who was a math major at Davidson, and I said, can you figure out a formula for how many ways there are to get from A to B in the street network? So I have this little game for y'all. Consider you're at point A and you want to get to point B, and there is one street. How many ways to get from A to B? One. Now let's add a second street. Now there are two ways. Now let's add a third, and this time a caveat that you can only you can only move in the goal-oriented direction. You can't double back. Now there are three ways, right? The first two, and then you can do this. Now add this street. Now there are six possible ways. The first three, 4, 5, 6. 6 unique ways to get from A to B. So he figured out that the formula for this, excuse me, is a factorial equation, x plus y factorial divided by x factorial y factorial, where x is the number of north-south blocks and y the number of east-west blocks. So you have 2 factorial. Do you remember your high school algebra? 2 plus 2 factorial, 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, 2 times 1, 2 times 1. 24 divided by 4 equals 6. So that's the equation. So now that you have that, consider a network of 10 blocks by 10 blocks. How many ways are there to get from A to B? Any guesses? A lot. There are a lot. So you do all the math, and there are over 184,000 possible ways to get from A to B. Another friend who's a mathematician, I asked him to do, if you just have one deviation, one double back along that block, and he figured that there's Noah Schiffman, and he figured out, and it's over 1 million possible ways. So this is important because if you have a lot of ways, the streets can be small, right? And they diffuse traffic. This is why the city of Charleston can handle millions of people downtown, but if you get out into the burbs, you quickly, you're sitting there in traffic for a long time. But it's very important to the human scale, to the public realm, to have these narrow, slow-moving streets. And even Jesus talked about this. He said, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. That was in the Sermon on the Mount. And I suggest that if you ever get in a fight with a traffic engineer about street design, that you toss this up. This is another great quote I like. This Ben Pentreath, in his great talk yesterday, talked about copy. Don't be afraid to copy. It's okay. Take it and be a thief, like James Jarmusch is suggesting here. And also, he quotes Jean-Luc Godard, who said, "It's not where you take things from, it's where you take them to." So that's what we did with the first development. This is New Point, and we just said they had it. That's our motto, was they had it right the first time. We're just going to take inspiration from these beautiful cities and create new neighborhoods. So that's an article from 1992. We got started in 91. Again, our focus as the developer was on building the public realm. We did we had a design code, and we got builders on board who liked the idea. They were building the private realm. We're building the public realm. We want to add value to what the builders are doing, the homeowners are doing with their home. We want what they do to add value to the public realm. You end up with a situation where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? And you create value that way. You create aesthetic value, you create economic value, you create social value. People just come out, they feel, they don't feel forced, they just naturally go for walks, and as they do, they just informally come in contact with their neighbor, and this helps form the bonds of community. We did little tricks like, so this is, we had a long stretch of street that we were worried about traffic building up. So we took, stole an idea from St. Philip's Church where it juts out into Church Street and the street goes around. So we did that with this little gazebo on New Point Road. And it terminates the vista down the street, so it's not quite as memorable as St. Philip's, but it's still beautiful. We were challenged with getting this by the fire department. They had to come out with their fire trucks and make sure they could get around it and everything. Our engineer, Stephen Davis, with Davis and Floyd, he said it was, he just said, oh, it's a horizontal speed bump. And they're like, oh, yeah, okay, we got it. We also built a park. It's the New Point Green, so that everyone in the neighborhood had access to come up to this beautiful view and look back over at historic Beaufort. These are early shots of that green, and ultimately homes like this got built on the green. These are actually by Historical Concepts, who's part of the Charrette team this week. Interesting story. So here you see on the left this, where's the pointer? So this was the green, and this was Factory Creek, and it overlooked Beaufort River. So we had houses, or we had a few lots that were directly on the water up here. And we had two lots left, one directly on the water and one overlooking the green here. And these folks came in, Bob and Judy Leavensay, the nicest people, and they were trying to decide, did they want to have a waterfront lot with its own dock or overlook the green? And finally, Judy Leavensay, his wife, said, well, you know, if we build on the water, no one will be able to walk in front of our house and see how beautiful it is. And we won't be able to interact with neighbors who walk by. So it's not for everyone, but a lot of people want that. They want to build in a prominent public space. So that's what that offered. And just a few other shots. So it's got a small amount of commercial at the entrance, not much. And that's kind of typical of the narrow streets there. Another project we worked on was an infill site where we worked with the city of Port Royal, which is, I don't know if you know Port Royal. Port Royal is kind of the forgotten stepsister to Beaufort, but it's a lovely historic town. And the city manager at the time was John Perry, a wonderful guy, and he wanted to make something happen in the town. So the town acquired 5 acres of land within their city, within the historic grid that was undeveloped, and went forward with designed it, or actually they didn't design it, they just put out an RFP. And so I formed an organization with Bob Turner, who is my partner at New Point, and Bob Pinkerton and Billy Kaiserling, who some of y'all probably know. He was the former mayor, and so we formed a little partnership to propose to develop this land, and they chose us, and we did this. It was a great public-private venture because, you know, we purchased all the materials to build the sidewalks and plant the trees, and the town's own crew, they planted the trees and built the sidewalks for us. So it turned out well, and it was just a more affordable. I mean, this was way back in the day, but the houses started at like $109,000, I think was the. So those ventures led to coming up to Mount Pleasant, and with my youngest brother Jeff and my late father Tom, we worked with the Jordan family from Columbia to acquire this large infill site. It was a very controversial rezoning process that took a couple years, but we had to make a lot of compromises. It was a lot. You can see this was an article from the 1997 Post and Courier, where you can see Ion. We're just how close we are to the Charleston Peninsula, and most of the development was happening way out 17. So it was a highly desirable site. It was surrounded by development of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And so part of the vision was to create a kind of a center for those the surrounding suburbs. We worked with Andres Duany, with Duany Plater Zyberk, and Victor Dover and Joe Cole with Dover Cole Partners. They collaborated on the design. If you go out there today, it's we're proud to have been involved with it and led that. It's a very compromised version of what was originally proposed, which included multifamily and townhomes and more commercial. These are photographs from 1997. Actually, this is my brother Jeff's and my truck on what is now Sowell Street. You can see one of the things we learned at New Point was that some of our streets were too straight for too long. Like I recall the little gazebo we put in the road. So at Ion, we rarely have a section of street that's straight for more than about 400 or 500 feet, and we'll deliberately deflect it. And that helps. It's one of those subtle things that helps calm traffic. We also built the first modern roundabout in Charleston County, I think the second in the state. It was interesting at the time when we were going through, I told you it was controversial. Our opponents would say, whatever to try to get the project tossed. But one of the things they said was that South Carolinians weren't smart enough to negotiate a roundabout, and it was definitely going to be a circle of death if it were built. So it turned out that it's not a circle of death. This was the first building, this little civic building on East Lake that my brother Jeff and I designed. And the first house is on the left. Actually, this is Jeff's house. And we couldn't, as I mentioned, we weren't able to do any attached housing. Everything had to be single-family detached. But we did, he built on this little lot. It was the smallest lot, 30 by 70-foot lot. And what we wanted to do right away is demonstrate that you could build small houses next to bigger houses. And so his was smaller than this house. He had 2 bedroom, 2 bath, 1,200 square feet upstairs, and then he also had a little accessory dwelling unit apartment on the ground floor, so more affordable. And the house next door, this was the first one sold. Jeff had this built for himself. This was the first one sold to Craig and Rafia Harris for $160,000. He was a Baptist minister. This street out in front is called Sowell Street, and the one perpendicular to it is Grace Lane. And so since he was a Baptist minister, we gave him a new address so he could be on Grace Lane. This is a more recent photo of the same area, and those are the 2 lots. That was my brother's house, and that was the Harris's house. You see street deflections. This was the first sub-phase in the neighborhood. This is the lake. And the houses across the street, like this one over here, sold for like $550,000 on the lake. One over here sold for $300,000 or so. So we demonstrated right away, so people, they have a hard time in the suburbs, like, we have to live in the neighborhood where all the houses cost X and others cost Y. But we wanted to overcome that. And the way you overcome that is with the public realm. What everyone shares together, and you're walking by, you don't really think about, that house is bigger than this one. It's just you're just enjoying the walk. It's a beautiful public realm. This is the problem, though. So here's the original price, and the prices, the Zillow estimates now. The average price in Ion last year was $2.4 million, average resale. And so there's a huge demand for this kind of environment, but a limited supply. And that's, again, what we're trying to address this week. That's what part of the Charrette, that's the city's vision. How do we make it possible, provide the opportunities for others to live in this place that we love so much? Just a few early slides of the neighborhood. This is the main commercial area, the Ion Square. There's that roundabout I showed. It's all developed out now. Those are the lakes. We did as much as we could to activate lakes. This is some kind of two canals that connect. Better shot, you see. That was when they were under construction. Now these are the thing about that no one really realizes that these are just, you know, retention ponds. This is an important part of the stormwater retention and flood control. And I feel strongly that that's what we need to do here in Charleston, is use these kind of facilities as measures to deal with flooding. And the mayor certainly knows this. Colonial Lake is a retention structure. You know, we can, when the storm's coming, we can let all the water flow out, you know, during low tide, close the gate, and then when the storm comes, the lake can fill up and then let it out at the next low tide. It's just a smart way to plan it, and you can create a beautiful amenity out of it. There's a few churches. There's two churches in Ion. This is just a shot of one of the Church of the Holy Ascension. All the congregants and even neighbors came out to help finish it up. It's a beautiful church. One of the controversies after we got approved, all the council members, the 6 who had voted to approve Ion, got swept out of office, unfortunately, during the next 2 election cycles. And so we were dealing with a hostile council for a while. And we wanted a school in Ion, so we wanted to build it on one of the civic sites. We had several civic sites planned in the neighborhood. And the city maintained, or the town administration said the school was not a civic use. So we had to sue them for that, and we won at circuit court. It went up to the Court of Appeals where we fortunately won that too. But in the interim, they operated out of these trailers in the middle of the square. So this is the most beautiful trailer in South Carolina. But there's the school. It was a charter Montessori school. It actually became so popular that they outgrew it and had to move, and so now it's a child care center. There's the school. But just some of the public realm, the amphitheater in Ion. One of the most gratifying things about being involved in the development of Ion was we formed a guild of builders, local builders. We deliberately rejected the idea of just selling to production builders. We were fortunate to have in the area some high quality local builders. So we formed a guild. It was kind of like, initially there were 10 members of the guild. Ultimately we grew that to 23. And after a couple of years, we were a lot of houses. There were as many as 100 houses being built at any one time. And so we thought what we would do, we really valued the quality of craftsmanship, and we wanted to recognize that. So we came up with this idea of the Guild Awards. And so we asked our builders to nominate their subcontractors, their tradespeople in different categories. So we might have interior carpentry, sheetrock, or landscaping, or what have you. And every year we would invite, we'd go through, we'd review all the nominations, we'd select 2 runners-up and a winner, and then we'd invite everybody to this big shindig where we had, you know, barbecue and beer and music. All the neighbors, the contractors, the subs, their families, everybody came out for this. And we'd have fun, and then halfway through, we would stop the festivities, and we would get up in our best kind of Academy Award format. We would say, okay, the nominees for Best Interior Carpentry are, you know, Williams Woodworking and Christian's Carpentry and Hughes Carpentry, and the winner is, drum roll, you know, Williams Carpentry, and William would come up and all proud, you know, and he'd get a little, you know, thing that would cost $20 to build, but he would get the Ion Award, the Guild Award. And it was so wonderful to see people, because their families would all be there, and they were so excited. And these were really the people who were building the neighborhood, right? They were the ones who were involved in building it. And so it was just so wonderful to be part of that, to see that. And I wish we'd have kept going. We kind of stopped after the development was mostly built out. But it was a wonderful thing. And we had an award for the outstanding gift to the street that we would give to a homeowner each year. So that's Ion. Just some before and after shots. It can happen really fast, as y'all know. So this is my first project that I was involved in downtown. This is Morris Square along Morris Street, and where Jasper and Smith and Felix. It was a one-block empty parcel that we purchased from the synagogue, and we worked with the city. Worked very closely with the city. We had to, among other things, we had to get the city. Tim Keene was the director of development, I believe, at the time. Or Josh, were you? Maybe you were there already. But among the things we had to do was the city had to take the streets back from the DOT. And so they were willing to do that. We were able to manipulate the street geometry a little bit to calm traffic speed. And it worked out really well. It's about 34 homes. They're pretty big homes, too. I think they're average about 2,800 square feet. This is a good way to, this is one of the challenges that we've been working on this week, is how do you deal with the flood elevation? This is really low. This street, Smith Street right here, is very low. So all these houses are built up. They have nice fenestration, they're alley served, and the garage is underneath them. So it worked out pretty well. This is Earl's Court. Had to explain to our British friends this is not the one in London. It's named after my late dog Earl. So it's right at the entrance to the old village, and it's we were able to get even narrower and narrower streets. This is one way, but this is like a 16-foot right-of-way right there. But again, we started selling houses in here. The first few were like 200 to 350. Here's a resale house that sold a few years ago for $1.3 million. And again, this is part of the problem. It's just a supply problem. We need to be building more of this. And this is one I've indirectly involved in, mostly just as a investor. I did build one home in here. But this is Cat Fiddle Street downtown. The first phase was built by Jerry Moran and George Holt, were developers. And then Reed Burgess came in and developed the second phase. He's got this wonderful manifesto here. But it's really a beautiful and inspiring place. If you hadn't had a chance to go down there, I would recommend doing that. It connects. It's kind of like some of these older streets downtown, or not far from here, which connected streets and made for a more interesting inner block. And that's what happened here. Cat Fiddle Street connects Bogard, Ashley, and also the Crosstown. You can sneak through under this house. I'll go back. Go forward. So you can go under this house. This was designed by Bevan and Liberatos, these two, and get to the Crosstown that way. And a lot of these have small little lockout apartments on the ground floor. So back to what we're doing this week. And I just mentioned with Cat Fiddle Street, these are some examples of those little. So this is the old walled city. So we got Water Street over here. This is Meeting. This is East Bay. This is Market. Used to be a creek. And so this is St. Philip's Church. So this is about 62 acres right here. And these were the original streets in that 62 acres. They may have extended a little bit further or later extended. But you have these little cut-through streets. And it created these wonderful environments, these wonderful opportunities for additional development on the inner blocks. This is from years ago. These values don't hold anymore, but I made an attempt to inventory what was in those in that 62 acres. I say 66, it's actually 62. So at the time, there were 720 homes, all types of homes. There was almost 800,000 square feet of commercial space and civic buildings. 6 museums, 6 cemeteries, city hall, 5 churches, 450 student school, First Baptist, and 2 arts theaters, including this one. So it's just all the DNA, Josh Martin has said this many times, is right here within a few minute walk. And it's just the oldest part of the oldest city in South Carolina and one of the oldest in the Southeast. So we've spent time looking at this aspect of the public realm. This is Church Street, just south of Water, where it widens out a little bit and forms this kind of little piazza here. It's really beautiful. This is Legree, and one of the things that I love about Charleston, and this is almost, I call it, it's not hardscape, it's not landscape, it's kind of softscape, where you see the trees actually growing in the street. I mean, that gives some people a fit, but I think it's lovely. It's really nice to have that. It's just so Charleston to me. Inventorying the different streets, the outdoor rooms, measuring them. This is, let's see, this is Lower Church Street, so that area south of Atlantic, I believe. And it's, we measured it. It's 27 feet right away, and 17 feet paved area. It's also brick. Brick, I think, is an important material we need to use more of, or we need to take the asphalt off of a lot of our brick streets, because it allows the rainwater to permeate into the soil rather than having to be carried away. So Chalmers Street, right outside where we're holding the Charrette. You measure that. Beden's Alley, beautiful little street. Imagine having those same kind of streets and converting Haygood Avenue or some of these streets in our target areas into a beautiful public realm like that you'd want to go and take a picture of and just walk. A couple of things I've been rather obsessed with recently, my urban obsessions, are what we call sidewalk porticos, and we have examples of that. St. Michael's, or the South Carolina Society Hall, or this, excuse me, the house right there at the corner of Charrette and Meeting. So they allow someone to get out of the sun and the rain, and they also frame the street really nicely. So we're proposing to do, or I'd like to see us do some of that in the new development. And also, even beyond that, to have habitable space, not just a porch over the portico or above the arcade or the colonnade, but actually habitable space. Excuse me, this is Ion, and a small example of it. Beautiful examples can be seen in Europe all over. This is Genoa here. And then also to have habitable space over streets. This is from the first phase in Mixon, and this is actually a public street going underneath the house here. This is a famous gate in Totnes in England. And this is another one. This is in Rome in the Copetti district. This was built, and that's kind of fanciful. I'm not sure we'd go that fancy. But it does show how you can do habitable space over street space. So I will conclude with that and take some questions. I do want to say, though, that related to the public realm, might a possible antidote to our divided world involve creating a public realm which enables personal connection and neighborliness, which encourages and inspires acts of beauty? At the very least, I think that's a good step to try for that. Thank you for listening.
what would you say our biggest obstacle is to improving our public realm and making it feel more like an outdoor room rather than, a street the cars drive on?
Yeah, it's the regulatory environment. It's the zoning basically outlaws these kind of neighborhoods from being built for the most part, or you have to go through this kind of brain damaging gauntlet to get it approved. It's also, I think, we are investing, and we have for going on 100 years, we heavily invest in these um, automotive infrastructure and, developing the suburbs. That's the policy. That's where we spend most of the money, our public monies, on infrastructure that really feeds and enables and then feeds sprawl. I don't think we would have the level of sprawl that we have today had it not been for incredible amount of government investment. So it's a combination of those two things. Question? They have a microphone coming.
Earlier, you mentioned how canals serve an important role in wastewater management and flood control.
Not wastewater, just stormwater.
Stormwater, sorry, my mistake. Do you think that function would be served as well in some of these newer developments, such as West Edge, with the Gadsden Creek? Do you think that could be repurposed for a role such as that? Do you think that would be helpful?
It'd have to be looked at, but I think there are definitely, storing water in that way, the same way as Colonial Lake, I think it's extremely helpful. So I don't know about, Gadsden Creek has been covered up and it'd have to be uncovered. Maybe there's something that could be done there. Yes.
Hey Vince, how are you? I'm just going to piggyback off of that previous question and ask more of a citizen's request. As we all go through this, I hope that we can consider daylighting some of those creeks for the activization, for the health and wellness, and maybe that allows us to do a little bit more density and these amazing design examples that you've shown. We're not really losing space if we do that. We're adding in more to the public realm, especially if you can kayak and jump in the water.
Sure.
Thanks.
Great point. Any other questions?
Mr. Mr. Graham, thank you for that presentation.
You're welcome.
As a developer, Ion, Morris Square, Earl Court, what's the percentage of affordable units that exist currently in those developments?
Well, in Ion, I guess affordable is relative. There are some, we did get approved, accessory dwelling units approved, and so those provide a more affordable means than primary home. But it's still, the prices are still crazy. It's a supply and demand thing. It's huge demand for these kind of environments, but a limited supply, so we have to build more of it. Earl's Court, there are some, like as in Cat Fiddle Street and these other places, there are these little lockout units, which I think are a wonderful way to get affordable housing, and of course it's good for the primary homeowner who can help pay the mortgage with that rent.
You had mentioned briefly that most of the development you've been able to achieve that has the character were through like PUDs, essentially giving yourselves kind of carte blanche to make your own rules. Whereas cities, municipalities tend to lean on conformity kind of in their zoning regulations. How do you see being able to as the city moves to kind of develop these larger areas, how do you think is a good strategy to create some of that character if they are looking to do things fast and to use the same plan over and over again? How do you maybe think of a strategy to create some of the quirkiness and character and not a maybe pretty but a very bland kind of look of whatever particular district they go with?
Well, an example of that, in answer to your question, is what we're doing this week. Where you have a vision to do just what you're talking about, and then you enable that division, or you actually name sites in which they could go. The problem was the zoning was not consistent with the master plan. And so once we started the process, a lot of the politicians ran for cover, and we just hit a buzzsaw of NIMBY opposition. So that ultimately led to all these. We got shot down actually the first time, and we had to come back and make all these compromises to make it happen. But it takes that. It's like I was saying earlier with the Martin Luther King quote. I mean, you have to have the will, you have to have the courage to see the vision through, and that's often lacking.
Sorry, to piggyback on his question, and since you mentioned zoning, in regards to the properties that are planned to be developed, are there any issues currently with zoning, or is that all, I guess, being considered with the types of buildings that are going to go on those lots?
The city has been very aggressive in making it possible so we can do this kind of density and this kind of urbanism. Do you want to say something more about that, Josh? No, he doesn't want to say. He said a lot about it already, but these are pre-approved sites to be able to do this kind of to execute this vision.
I had a quick question. In these plan developments, as you work through them, do you have any conversations about how much is planned at the front, and then how much is also left open to homeowners to develop over time and add different interventions as the development grows or changes, or are there any of those conversations that you have as you look at them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we had, as part of our PUD that was approved, the plan development, we had like, for example, the building lots, we had a minimum size of 27 feet. We couldn't go less than that. You had to have 27 feet on a public street. But other than that, the sky's the limit. So, and we had a set number of street types that we could use. But we learned what we did, we developed it in phases over time. So after each phase, we would make changes. And the code itself, the design code, was very simple. It was a small set of simple rules, and we did have a review process. We had actually had down the road, we actually gave certain architects who we trusted just carte blanche. They didn't have to go through the review process. But it enables creativity within that small set of simple rules. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Do you think this charrette is going to affect the city's zoning for the whole city in good ways that would create better urbanism?
Yeah, I hope it does, because it's the tremendous effort and all this talent that is here this week. Christian Sotil and his firm, excuse me, have been very involved in Union Pier, and just the amount of study of what makes Charleston, excuse me, sorry, is just extraordinary, and I think it could be used to inform a new zoning plan, a new peninsula plan.
Vince, great job.
Thank you.
Can you speak to the slides that you showed where you're out measuring alleys, right-of-ways, and maybe revisit Earl's Court? How did you deal with not the zoning code, but the fire code that pretty much states that you need a 20-foot clear zone? And maybe speak to any tricks that you came up with that meets the intent to get the fire marshal to buy into a narrower street? Well,
That's a good question, because the fire marshals, as you know, can make or break a project. We do have this, you can see here, that is a 20-foot clear zone, which we had to maintain. The right-of-way varies a little bit too, but we had to maintain that 20-foot clear zone so trucks could get in. We also had my longtime employee, Chad Bezenfelder, who was a project manager on this, is a former fireman. So he really speaks the language of fire officials. He knows what all the equipment is, the D-130 and how much hose they carry, and I think it's important to have someone like that who can empathize, understand what the fire officials are there to do. So those are a couple of tricks. But there is a 20-foot clear zone. And they also, this is a very short street. I don't have the plan of it, but the fire trucks can also just pull up to the main street and then drag their hose to fight a fire. It's the same situation in Catfiddle. Other questions? Here's one.
So, as you know, most streets are categorized by DOT functional class. That can really limit the types of public streets that we have. What would you suggest to provide kind of more varied street types, especially in urban or downtown contexts?
Reclaim all the streets from the DOT. The DOT is, it's the South Carolina Department of Transportation. Originally, it was the South Carolina Highway Department, and then it changed to South Carolina Department of Highways and Transportation, and then it changed to the South Carolina Department of Transportation. It's still the Highway Department. They're concerned about moving cars as fast as they can and efficiently as possible. The safety of cars. There's really no place for that mindset in an urban area. So I think that Charleston started offloading the responsibility and authority for downtown Charleston in the 40s and 50s. South Carolina actually, interesting, even though it's a relatively small state, it has the fourth largest DOT system in the country after North Carolina, Virginia, and Texas. I served as chairman of the South Carolina Infrastructure Bank for a while, and we did a deep dive into that. And best we could tell, the reason why that is, why there's so many highway miles in the state system, was because in the 40s, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina all shared the same New York Bond Council that was recommending that the states take all the roads they could into their system so they could get more federal money. So most states are much more decentralized system. So like we're at least 2, maybe 3 times, our system is 3 times the size, I think, of Florida, which is much bigger and has much more populace. So the city has done that in a number of cases. I think it just needs to accelerate that.
Thank you for presenting today and for the things you've built over time. On the topic of cars, what, in your opinion, is the correct minimum parking requirement?
0. I think it should be left up to the private property owner to decide that. I think that if they want to accommodate cars off street, that's fine. But more and more people, and oftentimes you don't need a car downtown. I think the city is, Ross Appel's here. Councilman Appel exercised great leadership, I think, in removing some of the minimum parking requirements for King Street, and it just facilitates, it enables people to, if I don't have to have a parking space, well, then I can redevelop upstairs. It just encourages that. So it's maybe an extreme view, but that's my feeling about it.
some new communities that will be built that will incorporate affordable housing. What are the challenges for developers in doing that kind of development? Is it realistic to expect this kind of intentionality in those communities? You know, I want to hear the linkage between this kind of beauty and intentionality and affordable housing development in the city. I feel like that's what I'm missing.
Well, Josh, you're not going to answer that? Again, the city has specified as part of the program for each of these sites is they're pre-approved. It will be pre-approved for a certain number of houses, 50% of which will have to be affordable, either for rent or for sale, and stay that way. And that's, if you don't want to abide by that, then don't respond to the request for proposal. But that's how the city intends to secure that. I think you should come here and answer the question.
So I think, just to repeat, I think you were asking perhaps more about the linkage between kind of the public realm attributes as it relates to the affordable housing. And so the answer to that is that beauty is kind of our thematic throughout, whether you're in a private lot, a public street, a private street, what have you. So as we're doing all of this, in terms of tonight, you saw more of the architecture, but as this progresses, we will be filling in between the houses, what the streets, the sidewalks, street trees, all those things look like. But it is important that we have inimitable public spaces, that we have a gorgeous public realm, because that shapes quality of life as well, and it goes back to people being proud of where they live, and as they come back to their house and home and those types of things. So we're taking all that into account. It's not, you're seeing a lot of the private realm right now in terms of kind of the architecture side, and we're moving now into the site plan, into the public realm side. So that's kind of part of the second portion of this exercise for the week.
Thank you, Josh. Did that answer your question?
What did I miss? And we're applying every one of these principles you saw tonight to Project 3500. Right, a big part of Project 3500 anticipates the redevelopment, the planned redevelopment of the Charleston Housing Authority properties. And so as part of that redevelopment, all of this will come in line with that as well.
Hello. Sorry. I was wondering about, there are a few parks adjacent to some of these sites that are actually very large parks. They're very good public spaces. Right next to Gadsden Green, we have Harmon Field. And right across from Cooper River Courts and Meeting Street Manor, we have, or I guess the planned redevelopment site at Morrison, 993 Morrison. You have Singleton Park. Now, Harmon Field is very well utilized, but both parks feel lacking. They're actually mostly just empty plots of grass. And I remember it was either the Monday or Tuesday lecture that talked about the functionality of a public space. You can't just have an empty piece of grass. Do you see these parks being kind of included as part of the Charrette or as part of Project 3500 as kind of an expansion of, the redevelopments of these places so that you have a higher quality public realm nearby?
Well, there's been some discussion. I think it's a fair point. I mean, some of these parks are so big, they're just kind of vacuous. And one thing that helps is to have higher buildings around it to help frame the park. Harmon Field is kind of a unique location because it used to be a cemetery. I think that's one of the reasons why it's so big, so we certainly have to respect that. Yeah, and I mean, a good example of a great new park, if you haven't been down to American Gardens that BMOC did, it's really quite beautiful, and it's effectively a linear park that just connects King and Meeting Street. It bumps out a little bit, but I think that's an example of, maybe there's opportunities to take a big space and cut it up into smaller parts, or move the park space into other parks and make a smaller, more intimate park.
Some compromises with the ION project, and I was wondering if you could go into what it would be like if you had complete control, or what were the compromises?
Well, the main ones were we had to eliminate any multifamily housing. So no apartments, no townhouses, no condominiums. There was a huge blowback against the plan. You know, the roundabout was just the tip of the iceberg, but the fear of the other. People unlike themselves who might have these godforsaken apartment dwellers living nearby. So it's just your typical not in my backyard, and they put so much pressure on the politicians that they just caved, and we lost that vote 5-4 in December of '95. It was very heartbreaking, and we weren't going to get approved. It became clear that the only way to get 5 votes in favor, we actually got 6, was to remove that multifamily component. We almost didn't move forward with it because it compromised the plan so much. But we had a lot of money in the kitty, and at that point, and we felt history lasts a long time. So maybe in some future period, some of these big giant houses will be split up into apartments, or taken down and an apartment building rebuilt. Any other questions? All right, well, there's one over here. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. One in the back there.
I'm curious about the Gadsden Creek area specifically. I know this is already a really flood-prone area, so can you speak a little bit to flood mitigation and preventing further flooding from existing housing, and still preserving some of the marsh area that's around there?
Well, a number of things that have already been done that were done in the first phase. Raising the street, the street had to be put on piles. There were a couple streets, so that has to be done. Raising the elevation. I've talked already about the use of kind of retention facilities that could be made into parks. I think I know that's a very, it's almost a sacred area to some people. So it just going to have to really thoughtfully figure out how that's addressed. But those are 2 ideas that come to mind. All right, I think that's it. Thank you all.
Thanks again, Vincent. Just want to remind everyone the final event of the week is Friday, 5 p.m. It is at the Dock Street, not City Council chambers. So we'll be back here Friday at 5 p.m. for the work in progress presentation. And so we'd love to see you all again on Friday night at 5 p.m. So thank you so much. Have a great evening.